It takes either ice-cool nerve or sheer panic to commit murder opposite a police station. More so if the room in which one commits the murder is almost directly overlooked by the said station offices. The case that led to a Lancashire-born ex-soldier making the 9 o'clock walk to the gallows began on a warm late spring morning on Tuesday the 10th of May 1927, when Albert Glass, a clerk in the left luggage department of London's Charing Cross railway station, noticed a nasty smell coming from a wicker trunk. Glass and colleague William Eisted examined it gingerly. "A dead body, that's what it is," Glass mused while his colleague went to check the booking in ledger. A cheque showed it had been deposited on the previous Friday, and the porter who helped carry it from the taxicab remembered the customer telling him to take good care of it, and he would be collecting it later when he returned to catch his train. As the man left the station, he dropped the luggage ticket. A boy working as a shoe shiner saw the ticket fall, and when the man quickly disappeared, he returned it to the left luggage office. Now, the pungent smell was making conditions in the office unpleasant. "We'd better call Bow Street," Glass told his colleague, and a call was made from the station telephone kiosk. Divisional Detective Inspector William Steele and Detective Sergeant Lambert were first to the scene. They agreed there was indeed a foul smell coming from inside the trunk, which was clearly not airtight. Before opening it, Steele pulled out his pocketbook and made a few notes. The trunk was a standard size, around 3 foot 6 inches long, made of wickerwork with a rounded top and wrapped in a black cloth, secured with a wide strap. It bore a sticker for the London and South Western Railway Company and had a label attached addressed to a Mr. F. Austin of St. Leonard's, erroneously spelt with the O of Leonard's omitted. On either side was a large printed letter A, and on the top were the initials IFA. Asked if he could recognise the man who had deposited it, Eisted said he handled around 1,500 baggage items that day, and with heavy items the porter placed them in the storage area, and he merely handed out a numbered ticket. There was no time noted on it, so he could not even be sure if he was on duty or on lunch when it was booked in. Inspector Steele carefully forced a lock to reveal several parcels, wrapped in brown paper tied neatly with string, along with an assortment of clothes and rags. Untying the first of these, he was horrified to see it contain a severed human arm. The second revealed a similarly severed lower leg, and the largest package contained a female torso with the head still attached. Steele immediately informed his superiors and was soon joined at the scene by several detectives from the Metropolitan Police, including the Chief Constable, Frederick Wensley, a long-serving policeman who had joined the force in the days of Jack the Ripper. Also joining them at the scene was a police doctor, who, in spite of the decomposing and dismembered body, still had to formally confirm death had taken place before a murder inquiry could begin. It was clear that the woman had been killed elsewhere, so Wensley immediately called for the assistance of Scotland Yard, and Detective Superintendent George Cornish was put in charge of the investigation. To the relief of the left luggage staff, the trunk and its foul-smelling contents were removed to Horseferry Road Coroner's Court, where after a preliminary inspection by Dr. Weir and Dr. Rose, they were in due course examined by Home Office pathologist Sir Bernard Spilsbury. Spilsbury was soon able to give detectives quite a bit to go on. He found that the remains were those of a well-built woman aged around 35 to 40 years old. She had bruising on her stomach, forehead and back, and these had almost certainly been caused while she was unconscious. He was able to state that despite the dismembering, the cause of death had been asphyxia, and she had been dead for about a week. Spilsbury also told detectives that the dissection seemed to have been done by someone with medical or anatomical skills, as some of the cuts were neat and precise rather than having been hacked away at. Aside from the medical leads, there were other clues inside the trunk. A filthy duster was tied around the woman's head, and there were a pair of size 5 shoes, a lady's handbag containing 4 sticks of chewing gum, a pair of slate grey knickers with the name tag marked P. Holt, a woman's dress, and a pair of white knickers with laundry marks 447 and 581. The items along with the trunk were photographed and pictures sent to the national newspapers. At Charing Cross Station, neither the porter, booking clerks nor the shoeshine boy were able to give any sort of useful description to the detectives other than he was a man of medium height. An appeal was also made for the taxi driver who had delivered the trunk to the station to come forward. An officer was sent down to St. Leonard's, where he found a Mr. F. Austin, but he had no connection to the trunk, was quickly able to establish his innocence, and that line of inquiry was closed. Mrs. Holt was traced to an address in Chelsea and recognised the items as once being her property. She said over the last couple of years she had around 10 servants as cooks, maids or cleaners, and any one of those could have taken it. Checks soon eliminated all but one potential person and Mrs. Rolls. Cornish asked Mrs. Holt if she would be able to identify the woman's face from the dismembered body, and she bravely agreed. Mrs. Rolls was actually Minnie Alice Bonati. She had married an Italian waiter, Bianco Bonati, in 1913, but had soon begun an affair with her lodger, a man named Fred Rolls, and with him she had left her husband, they had moved in together, and she had taken his surname. Police soon discovered that 36-year-old Minnie Bonati worked as a prostitute. A number of her regular clients were interviewed, and one by one able to satisfy detectives of their innocence. Minnie was last seen alive on Sydney Street, close to her lodgings in Chelsea, at around 4 p.m. on Wednesday the 4th of May, which concurred with Spilsbury's estimation of the approximate date of death. Meanwhile, police investigation into the origins of the trunk soon turned up a lead. A shopkeeper thought he recognised it as one he had recently sold. George Ward, the owner of Brixton Trunk Company, came forward after reading reports of the case and seeing photos in the press. He identified it as one he had sold a week before for 12 shillings and sixpence to a man he described as tanned, average height, slight moustache and with a military bearing. His daughter confirmed the trunk was indeed the one they had sold, as she recognised some repairs she had made to it before it was put on sale. Then taxi driver Edward Shapington also came forward, telling detectives he had picked up a fare with a similar trunk and taken him to Charing Cross Station. He said that on Friday afternoon around 1:30 he had taken 2 men from the Royal Automobile Club in Pall Mall to Rochester Row Police Court, and after dropping his fare he had been hailed by a man standing in the doorway of an office block at 86 Rochester Row, directly opposite the police station. He had helped the man to wedge the trunk into the passenger footwell of the cab, and when he joked about the weight and asked if it contained lead or pound notes, the man simply smiled and said no, it just contained books. He was taken to Charing Cross Station, and after the fare was paid and they struggled to get out of the cab, he watched the porter collect it and the 2 men headed inside the station. Detectives went to 86 Rochester Row. The ground floor was occupied by a shop. On the first floor was a solicitor's office, and on the second floor a one-room office occupied by Edwards & Co, business, transfer and estate agents. The room was furnished with a desk, tables and chairs, and a large Turkish carpet measuring some 14 foot by 12 foot. It seemed the occupier would not be coming back, as there was a note on the desk to landlord Charles Clover saying, "I am sorry to inform you I have gone broke, so cannot use the office further." Officers soon found it was rented by 36-year-old John Robinson, and although the rent was paid up until the 22nd of May, Robinson had not been seen for several days, neither here nor at his lodgings. Detectives did, however, find a telegram addressed to Robinson at the Greyhound Hotel in Hammersmith, which had been returned to sender. This was a vital clue. On the previous afternoon, Chief Inspector Cornish had been puzzling over the filthy duster, one of the items found in the trunk, which had been wrapped around the woman's face. On a whim he decided to wash it under some running water and was soon able to pick out the word Greyhound on the edge of the cloth. Now, with the telegram mentioning Greyhound, this was something they quickly needed to follow up. One of the staff at the hotel was Mrs. Annie Robinson, who claimed she was married to John Robinson. Background checks had already discovered he had abandoned a wife and 4 children in his native Lancashire, and when he had wed for a second time, it had been bigamously. He had since split with Annie Robinson, but she told detectives they still kept in touch from time to time, and had in fact arranged a meeting for the following afternoon at the Elephant and Castle in Walworth at 6 o'clock. It was now Thursday the 19th of May, 9 days after the gruesome discovery, and Inspector Cornish finally had a suspect in the frame. He accompanied Annie Robinson when she went to meet her estranged bigamous husband. Robinson seemed calm and unfazed by the questions, strenuously denied anything to do with the death of Minnie Bonati, and readily agreed to be put up for identification. Neither the seller of the trunk, the taxi driver, nor staff at the railway station picked Robinson out of the identity parade, and reluctantly they had to let him go. Cornish, however, was convinced he had his man. On Sunday, the 22nd of May, he sent detectives Clark and Burt back to Rochester Row, instructing them to make another, more thorough search of the offices. They noticed a crack in one of the windows, a dented fender by the fire, but most tellingly, trapped in the folds of a wicker basket, was a blood-stained matchstick. This suggested violence had taken place there, and Robinson was brought in again for further questioning. Detectives called at his house on Delaune Street at dawn on the following morning. He was roused from his bed, told to dress and taken to Scotland Yard. Although Cornish had very little evidence against him at this stage, Robinson was unaware just what had caused them to quickly rearrest him. The detectives now used a common tactic to make the suspect sweat. Robinson was left alone for over an hour in the company of Detective Sergeant Clark. Finally, he asked if he could speak to Chief Inspector Cornish. He now admitted he knew much more about the case than he had previously said, and admitted he may be responsible for her death. He now made a statement in which he claimed he had invited Minnie back to the office. An argument broke out, they fought, and Minnie fell backwards and banged her head on the fireplace. Robinson had then panicked and fled. Returning on the following morning, he expected to find her gone, but instead she lay where she fell, the blow having killed her. Horrified at the situation he now found himself in, Robinson decided that rather than go to the police and risk being charged with murder, disposal of the body was the best thing to do. He bought a knife to dismember Minnie and the trunk to conceal the body in. Later that afternoon he took detectives to Clapham Common and showed them where he had buried the knife at the base of a tree. Held at Brixton Prison, Robinson was remanded in court 5 times before a trial date was set. He also claimed that the confession in his statement was made under duress, but this was disputed. Each of the hearings heard various evidence the police were compiling, and also a little more about the man charged with the murder. Robinson had been born in Lee, Lancashire, into a poor family. He left school at 12 years of age and took a job as an errand boy for the Cooperative Society. Coincidentally, the murder he was charged with took place in a room above a co-op shop. He had a number of jobs including barman, bank clerk and butcher, and this tallied somewhat with Spilsbury's claims that the dissection of the limbs had been done with a skilled hand. He worked for a time as a tram conductor at Blackpool, where he met his first wife. They married in 1912 and had 4 children. They last saw each other in 1920 when they separated, and neither she nor the children had seen or heard of him since until reading of his arrest in the papers. In 1914, at the outbreak of the war, Robinson had enlisted into the army, rising to the rank of sergeant, and had fought in Egypt for 3 years before a posting to Ireland, where he was stationed at the Curragh, one of the army's largest garrisons, some 30 miles outside of Dublin. In 1923, he met Annie Maxwell, a native of Tasmania, Australia, who was working as a barmaid in Dublin. They bigamously married in the following year, and after his discharge from the army due to ill health, they had moved to Bradford, where he had used his army pension to set up a greengrocer business. This failed within the year, and they relocated to Folkestone, where Robinson found himself in trouble with the police in August 1924, when he befriended a wealthy woman and stole some jewellery from her. Although he quickly returned it, she pressed charges against him, and he was sent to prison for 1 month, charged with theft. Since then, other businesses had failed, and his second marriage had also ended, although they remained friends and kept in regular contact. Whilst on remand, he wrote a desperate letter to his estranged second wife Annie, asking her not to believe what she read in the papers and pleading for her to visit him. "My dear, you will now know from the papers I have been remanded. I want to tell you how deeply grieved I am at the trouble and worry this is causing you, but please bear up. It is not so bad as the papers make it out. You must not believe I have confessed to anything. I did not do it, therefore I cannot confess to anything. I want you to keep your head up and hope for the best. I ask you to think of me during this great strain and pray it will come out all right for me. Please write me a letter of hope. I can write a lot of letters from here and can have a visitor every day between 1:30 and 3:30 except for Saturday and Sunday. This letter will be censored of course, and suppose yours will be as well. Please write back as early as you can and come and see me as early as possible. I did not do it, therefore I shall go on hoping, although things look black at the present. Good night, dearest. Don't harden your heart too much. All my love, for all time, Jack. P.S. If we ever needed a friend, it is now. We shall find out if we have any worth calling friends." John Robinson's trial at the Old Bailey before Mr Justice Swift opened on Monday the 11th of July. Large queues began to assemble at daybreak and the gallery was packed when Robinson was brought into the dock. Asked by the clerk of the court how he pleaded, he said in a firm voice, "Not guilty." Mr Percival Clark KC led for the prosecution and said their case was mainly based on the statement Robinson had made when arrested, and in which he was alleged to have said, "I met her at Victoria and took her to my office. I want to tell you all about it. I'd done it and cut her up." Robinson claimed that around 4 o'clock on Thursday the 5th of May he had been accosted by Mrs Bonati on the concourse of Victoria Station. They had gone back to his office in Rochester Row. He said she had then demanded money, and when he refused she became abusive and rushed at him, lashing out. In order to protect himself, he said he had pushed her away, but she slipped, fell backwards and struck her head on the metal fender. He had, he said, left the office and gone home via a public house, expecting her to recover and have left when he returned on the following day. On entering the office that Friday morning, he was horrified to find the woman was still there, lying face down on the carpet. Feeling sure no one would believe him, he began to panic. He bought some brown paper and string and also a large kitchen knife from Staines Kitchen Equipment at 94 Victoria Street. Robinson had then also purchased the trunk, which he brought back to the office on a bus before he set about dismembering the body and taking it to Charing Cross Station. Robinson admitted everything except any intent to kill. His defence was handled by Mr. Lawrence Vine, and one of the witnesses he called was Mrs. Bonati's lover, Frederick Rolls, to help support the idea Robinson had been provoked into carrying out the attack. Rolls said in recent times Minnie had become an alcoholic and had also a very violent temper. The evidence of accidental death was destroyed when the prosecution called Professor Spilsbury to take the stand. He claimed that Minnie Bonati had been asphyxiated after a violent assault, and the cause of death could not have come as a result of a fall, as Robinson had maintained. She may well have fallen and banged her head, but the fact she had been suffocated, most likely by a cushion from a chair in the office, could not be anything other than murder. When asked by the prosecution why he did not go straight to the police, Robinson bowed his head and claimed, "I was in a blue funk and did not know what to do." The trial was to last 3 days. In summing up, the judge said that they either believed the prosecution's case, that Robinson had willfully murdered her after she had attacked him in the office. He had suffocated her after knocking her to the ground. Alternatively, they believed the defence's claim that death was accidental and she may have suffocated in the folds of the carpet when lying face down on the floor. The jury needed just 1 hour to find Robinson's version of the suffocation as totally implausible and returned a verdict of guilty of willful murder. And on Wednesday, the 13th of July, John Robinson was sentenced to death. He launched an appeal that was quickly rejected, perhaps the brutal nature of the murder and subsequent dismembering foregoing any chance of the Home Secretary showing mercy. On the afternoon before his execution, as the hangmen were at work preparing the drop, he had an emotional farewell visit from Annie Robinson. "You can tell them that whatever can be said about me, I did not kill that woman intentionally, and I would not lie to you at this moment, Annie." At 9 o'clock on Friday morning, the 12th of August 1927, John Robinson was hanged at Pentonville Prison by Robert Baxter and his assistant Robert Wilson. The newly designed 3-storey execution suite was still under construction, and therefore Robinson had to make a last walk from his condemned cell to the execution shed situated in the prison grounds at the end of B Hall. Standing 5 feet 8.5 with a muscular neck and weighing a little over 12.5 stone, Baxter gave him a drop of 6 foot 6 inches. Death was said to be instant from dislocation of the 3rd and 4th vertebra, and the drop later found to have caused a 4-inch separation between them when the body was taken off the rope an hour later. A large crowd had congregated in the summer sunshine waiting for the fatal hour. When notice of execution was posted on the prison gates, Minnie Bonati's younger brother, Alfie Budd, pushed his way to the front and reading the notices cried, "Thank God," before turning round and walking away. An inquest was held at 11 a.m. and the number of residents on nearby Caledonian Road were summoned to take part in a coroner's jury. They found the cause of death was due to judicial execution, and later that day John Robinson was buried in a corner of the prison reserved for executed murderers, now known as Crippin's Grass, as the ghost of Dr. Crippin, hanged in 1910, was said to haunt the spot where he had been laid to rest. There are 1 or 2 interesting footnotes to this story. The suit Robinson was wearing when he was arrested was taken away for forensic examination, and as he claimed it was his only one, Detective Sergeant Len Burt, later to rise to become commander of Scotland Yard Special Branch, lent him one of his. Robinson wore it at his trial, and as Burt never received the suit back, he assumed the prisoner had been hanged in it, or it adorned the wax effigy that appeared that summer in Madame Tussauds' Chamber of Horrors. Also, by a grim coincidence, the knife John Robinson used to cut up Minnie Bonati was purchased from the same hardware store next to Victoria Station that Patrick Mann had used to buy the knife he dismembered his victim with in Brighton 3 years earlier. And the bloodstained matchstick that had ultimately led John Robinson to the gallows ended up in Scotland Yard's Black Museum, where it remains to this day. My name is Steve Fielding. Thank you for watching and listening to another episode of Tales from the Hangman's Record. If you have enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe to my YouTube channel, The Hangman's Record, if you don't already do so. Also, please check out my website, thehangmansrecord.com, to find out more on my other books and to order copies of The Hangman's Record 3-volume series at a special discount price. Please use the comments below for thoughts on this case and for suggestions for any future episodes in the Tales from the Hangman's Record series.